This is the Sony 135 f1.8 G Master lens. It is by far one of the best lenses that I have ever owned in my entire life, but it's one of those lenses that I just do not use nearly enough. And this is Viltrox's new answer to that lens. At less than half the price with very similar specs, is it anywhere near the league of this legendary G Master lens? Let's check it out. Viltrox sent this over for the sake of this review, but they're not seeing this video before it gets posted, anything like that. But all these thoughts are definitely my own. Now, like I mentioned at the kind of outset of this video, the G Master 135 f1.8 is incredible. Again, one of the best lenses that I've ever owned, but it's one of those lenses that I just very rarely bring out. When I do bring it out, I love the images that I get out of it, but it's just a very, very specific focal length for me. And to be frank, like I mentioned in my video about the new 85 GM2, the reason I bought this is because the 85 GM2 didn't exist. If that newer version had existed, I probably would have bought that over this 135, but I was kind of trying to make this work in lieu of that. So for me as a wedding photographer, it's more of like I'm gonna pull it out when I need something a little bit longer, when I need that length. So it's basically only gonna come out during ceremony, speeches, things like that. Every once in a while, it'll come out for landscapes and other things. But again, the size and weight and just the fact that it's an odd focal length for me means that I'm not bringing out nearly as much as I really wish I did, considering how good this lens is. So, in all honesty, that's where something like this Viltrox comes in at a very, very good place in the market. Now, I'm not sure what the final pricing is going to be, but it's definitely significantly less than the Sony version. And while it does have a few downsides, it actually does have a lot of the upside of the Sony version as well. Now, from a simple design perspective, has a lot of the same things. We have a large focus ring here. We have an aperture ring here. Now, the Viltrox also adds this little display here, which is pretty odd, but you know, kind of a fun, quirky little thing. The lens also allows you to click or declick the aperture. It also has two custom function buttons as well, on this one on the side and one on the top, same as the G Master. So if you are someone like me that likes to use those as kind of like a APS-C crop button or a focus hold or whatever the case may be for you, you're able to do that on the Viltrox lens as well. Now, one of the things that the Viltrox lens does that the GM does not here, and to be honest, again, I prefer the GM version for sure, is that this aperture ring here, there is no hard stops. So if you want to go all the way to one side or the other, you can just turn it all the way off, but it's pretty easy to just turn back and then you're just randomly at, you know, F16 or something. And even if you get to the end, like I'm at 1.8 and I'm just turning. So kind of a weird implementation, not a really big fan of it. Much prefer to have it just straight up like this, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Now, while they do look pretty similar, obviously, the size and weight are fairly significantly different in a couple different ways. The Viltrox is just a little bit larger. It doesn't look, again, that much larger, but it is. And then as far as the weight goes, it looks like it's coming in at about 270, 280 grams more, which is fairly significant as the GM comes in at like 960 some grams or 950, and then this comes in at over 1,200 grams. It's a decent amount, like almost 300 grams different, and that means that it weighs, what, like a quarter more or whatever. So it's not like an insignificant amount that it is larger, but I will say neither of these lenses are small anyway, but you can definitely tell that the GM is significantly lighter. So to be honest, if the 135 is somehow your focal length of choice, it probably makes sense to get the GM just for that weight savings. If you are carrying that around all day long, having the weight savings on your wrists, on your fingers, things like that is going to definitely come into play over a long, long day. I do find that this lens in particular, this focal length and this pairing ends up being a very, very good pairing for like a second shooter or something like that at a wedding. I also use this as another angle as I filmed an elopement recently. So it works out pretty well for a lot of things. And so again, if it's something that you're using all the time, like every weekend for a significant part of the day, it might be worth the weight savings just in general. Now, build quality, weight savings, whatever, all that aside, none of that really matters unless the quality of image that comes out of these things is similar in the first place. And I will say that it is very difficult to really even tell the difference between the two of these. I went out and shot some images on both of these side by side, one on the A7R5 and then one on the A7CR. Each camera had the exact same settings, was on a tripod, and you really, really can't tell which one's which, to be honest. In using these, like I could swap back and forth and they're pretty much identical. Bokeh seems good. In fact, there's a little bit less of the cat's eye effect going on in the Viltrox. And maybe that's because it looks like the front element is actually a little bit larger in the Viltrox than it is in the Sony. Now they both take 82mm filter threads, but it looks like the Sony has a little bit less of just a front opening in diameter than the Viltrox does. So if that's something that you don't care for, then the Viltrox is gonna give you a little bit less of that cat's eye effect. But in terms of sharpness, I mean, just negligible. They both look really, really good. And in terms of autofocus performance, I use them both back to back. I would swap them between the cameras as well. Didn't really notice any difference in autofocus. I also stuck those two cameras side by side with the exact same settings, the same autofocus tracking speeds, everything like that, and just did a few different walks back and forth on a little trail out by my house. They seemed to perform pretty well. There was even one time where the Viltrox grabbed focus on me before the Sony one did. I think that's just more on the bodies than anything. I think the only thing really that's gonna come down to whether or not you'd want to get one over the other. If you were using the Sony A9 III and you need to have 120 photos per second tracking for that kind of stuff, I don't believe third-party lenses have that capability at this time. So if that's something that's important to you and you're doing sports, maybe like gymnastics or something, maybe basketball, I don't know what you would use a 135 for necessarily, but if that's something that you're needing out of this, the GM probably makes a lot of sense. Again, I think that the GM makes a lot of sense in terms of just being a little bit smaller and lighter, but for the cost savings that you're getting on this thing, and especially for someone like me where like I want a 135 in my bag, I'll probably pull it out for sometimes during the ceremony, sometimes during speeches. I want to have one around because I think it's a really useful focal length, but is it going to be something that I use every single wedding? Probably not. It is actually exactly like their 16mm. It's something that I'm keeping in my bag. It's useful for wide scenic stuff. Am I gonna use it all the time? No, but that's where I think that going even third party for some of the auxiliary focal lengths that you're not always using is just the play. Those lenses that might not be living on your camera nearly as much, that is 100% where I find something like this to be really, really beneficial. And to be honest, I was already having kind of trouble justifying keeping the 135 GM in my bag. And this kind of just confirms that I'm probably gonna sell this in order to buy the 85 GM2 with the money that I will sell this for, and then use this for the times I do need a 135. So let me know your questions in the comments down below. I honestly think that both are fantastic lenses. If money was like literally no object, yeah, I would keep the GM. There's plenty of reasons why it's a great lens and why it deserves to be costing significantly more. But for someone like myself that is going to use this lens and this focal length more infrequently, but I still want to have one in my bag and available, again, I think this where something like this makes a ton of sense. It is bigger, it is heavier, but the incredible cost savings that you're going to be getting by buying something like this over the more than twice the price GM is where that just makes a lot more sense for someone like me that does have to think about price like most people out there do as well, I think. So thanks again, subscribe if you haven't already. And then if you wanna check out my video on the A7R5 versus A9 III, you can check that out up here. Check out my video on the Samyang 35 to 150 as another alternative, and I will see you on one of those videos.